That's not even a real medal, Olivia. You bought that online, didn't you? My sister Victoria's voice cut through the Thanksgiving dinner like a blade, her perfectly manicured finger pointing at the bronze star hanging in our family's dining room display case in Millbrook, Oregon. The entire table went silent. Aunt Patricia's fork froze halfway to her mouth. My stepfather Richard leaned back in his chair, that familiar smirk spreading across his face like he'd been waiting for this moment all evening. I'm Staff Sergeant Olivia Johnson, 32 years old, 8 years of active duty, 2 Purple Hearts, 1 Bronze Star with Valor, and apparently, according to my own family, a fraud. Come on, Liv, my cousin Derek chimed in, washing down his turkey with another gulp of wine. We've all seen those replica medals they sell at military surplus stores. Real heroes don't have to prove anything to anybody. The laughter that followed felt like nails on a chalkboard. My stepfather nodded approvingly, like Derek had just solved world hunger. But here's what they didn't know that night, as they passed around the cranberry sauce and their casual cruelty. In exactly 47 minutes, the Pentagon would call. The Deputy Secretary of Defense himself would interrupt our family dinner to personally thank me for Operation Nightfall, a classified mission that saved 38 American hostages in Kazakhstan. A mission so sensitive that even my own family couldn't know about it. Until tonight. So tell me, what would you do if your own family treated your sacrifices like a joke? Drop your answer below because this story is about to get a whole lot more interesting. Growing up in the Johnson household was like living inside a museum of disappointment, where every conversation was a guided tour of everything I wasn't. My mother died when I was 14, leaving me with Richard, a man who married into our family but never quite figured out how to love the daughter that came with it. He was a successful real estate developer in Millbrook, the kind of man who measured worth in square footage and profit margins. To him, military service was something people did when they couldn't make it in the real world. Victoria, my half-sister, was Richard's biological daughter and the golden child of our fractured family tree. She was 3 years younger, but somehow always ahead in his eyes. Victoria got the college fund. Victoria got the new car for graduation. Victoria got the encouragement, the pride, the wall space for her community college business degree. When I earned my high school diploma with a 3.8 GPA while working 2 part-time jobs, Richard's response was a shrug and, well, at least you didn't drop out. The day I told them I was enlisting was the day our family's fault lines became permanent cracks. I was 19, sitting at this same dining room table, nervous but determined. I'd already taken the ASVAB, aced it, and signed my preliminary paperwork. All that was left was to break the news. The Army? Richard had said, not even looking up from his real estate journal. Olivia, that's not really a career. That's what people do when they can't figure out what they want to be when they grow up. Victoria had been more direct. You're going to get yourself killed over there for what? Some stranger's political agenda? That's not brave, Liv. That's stupid. But it wasn't about politics for me. It wasn't about proving anything to anyone. I joined because I needed structure in a life that felt chaotic since Mom died. I joined because I wanted to be part of something bigger than Richard's disapproval and Victoria's constant comparisons. I joined because when I looked in the mirror, I saw potential that nobody else in this house seemed to recognize. The first few years were tough. Basic training at Fort Benning was a baptism by fire, but I thrived. I discovered I had a gift for tactical analysis and an unshakable calm under pressure. My drill sergeants noticed, my commanding officers noticed, everyone noticed, except the people's whose opinion I still, stupidly, cared about most. When I came home on leave after my first deployment to Afghanistan, Richard barely acknowledged me. Victoria asked if I'd seen any real action or if I had just been filing paperwork in an air-conditioned trailer. When I tried to share some of my experiences, the schools we'd helped rebuild, the communities we'd protected, the genuine difference we were making, Richard would change the subject to Victoria's latest business venture or his new property acquisition. The pattern became predictable. Every holiday, every family gathering, every phone call home became an exercise in feeling invisible in my own family. They'd ask about my little military phase, like it was a hobby I'd eventually outgrow. When I got promoted to sergeant, then staff sergeant, the achievement seemed to bounce off them like rain on concrete. The worst part wasn't the dismissal. It was the doubt they planted in my own mind. Late at night, in barracks from Kabul to Kandahar, I'd wonder if they were right. Was I just playing dress-up? Was I fooling myself about making a difference? But then Operation Nightfall happened. And everything changed. Tonight, as I sat at this table listening to my family debate the authenticity of my Bronze Star like it was some trinket I picked up at a garage sale, I knew something they didn't. In my pocket, my secure phone was set to vibrate, because sometimes recognition comes from the places that matter most, and sometimes it comes exactly when you need it most. The phone was about to ring. Let me tell you who I really am, because my family clearly never bothered to find out. Staff Sergeant Olivia Marie Johnson, serial number 479218553. 8 years active duty, 82nd Airborne Division. Expert marksman rating, Airborne qualified, Ranger qualified. 2 Purple Hearts for wounds received in combat. 1 Bronze Star with Valor device for heroic action under enemy fire. And a top-secret security clearance that took the FBI 18 months to approve. But here's what those credentials don't tell you. I've pulled 3 wounded soldiers out of a burning Humvee while under mortar attack in the mountains of Helmand Province. I've talked a 19-year-old private through his first firefight while simultaneously calling in air support coordinates that saved my entire squad. I've gone 72 hours without sleep to establish a forward operating base that became the staging ground for rescuing 43 kidnapped civilians from a terrorist cell. These aren't stories I made up. These aren't participation trophies. These are entries in my official military record, witnessed by dozens of fellow soldiers, documented by commanding officers, and verified by Army intelligence. The Bronze Star they were mocking? Let me read you the official citation. For exceptionally valorous conduct in the face of enemy fire during Operation Desert Shield on November 15, 2023. Staff Sergeant Johnson displayed extraordinary heroism when her convoy came under coordinated attack from insurgent forces near Bagram Airfield. Despite being wounded by shrapnel from an improvised explosive device, Staff Sergeant Johnson rallied her scattered unit, established a defensive perimeter, and single-handedly suppressed enemy fire until air support arrived. Her actions directly resulted in 0 friendly casualties and the successful completion of a critical supply mission. Staff Sergeant Johnson's courage under fire and selfless dedication to her fellow soldiers reflect great credit upon herself and the United States Army. That citation is signed by General Patricia Hawthorne, Commander of Joint Special Operations. It's countersigned by Colonel Marcus Fitzgerald, my regimental commander. It was approved by a review board of 5 decorated combat veterans and processed through 3 levels of Pentagon verification. But according to my sister Victoria, I bought it online. Here's what she doesn't know. That IED blast gave me a traumatic brain injury that took 6 months to recover from. The shrapnel in the left shoulder still sets off metal detectors at airports. I have 3 titanium screws holding my collarbone together and nerve damage that makes my left hand go numb when it gets cold. Those aren't things you can buy on the internet. Victoria also doesn't know about the nightmares, the ones where I wake up at 3 a.m. in a cold sweat, thinking I can still smell burning diesel fuel and hearing Specialist Rodriguez screaming for his medic. She doesn't know that I can't drive past construction sites anymore because the sound of heavy machinery makes my heart race and my palms sweat. She doesn't know that crowded restaurants sometimes send me into panic attacks because too many voices talking at once sounds like radio chatter from a combat zone. But she knows I'm a fraud because I don't talk about these things at dinner parties. My stepfather, Richard, thinks military service isn't a real career because he measures success by bank account balances and property portfolios. What he doesn't understand is that success in my world is measured differently. Success is bringing everyone home alive. Success is completing the mission no matter the cost. Success is being the person others can count on when everything goes to hell. I've been that person more times than I care to count. In Kandahar, when our forward operating base came under siege for 3 days, I was the non-commissioned officer who organized the defense rotations and rationed our water supplies to last until reinforcements arrived. When Private Campbell had a mental breakdown during his first patrol, I was the one who sat with him in a bombed-out building for 4 hours, talking him through his panic attack while sporadic gunfire echoed in the distance. When our unit got separated during a sandstorm near the Pakistani border,
I was the one who navigated us back to friendly territory using nothing but a compass and dead reckoning. These aren't just stories. They're performance evaluations. They're witness statements. They're after-action reports filed in triplicate and stored in Pentagon archives. My commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Brighton, once told me something I'll never forget. Johnson, you have that rare combination of tactical intelligence and moral courage that makes great soldiers into great leaders. The Army needs more people like you, and so does the world. Colonel Brighton wrote my recommendation for officer candidate school. She nominated me for the Bronze Star. She personally called me 2 months ago to tell me about a classified operation that would require someone with my specific skill set and security clearance. That operation was called Nightfall. And tonight, as my family debated whether my medals were real or fake over pumpkin pie and coffee, I knew that phone call was coming because when you serve your country with honor, your country remembers, even when your family forgets. The question isn't whether I deserve recognition for my service. The question is whether they deserve the privilege of being related to someone who earned it. The Johnson family dinner table had unspoken rules, and I'd been breaking them since I was old enough to speak. Rule number 1, Richard's achievements were conversation starters. Victoria's accomplishments were family milestones. Mine were awkward interruptions that needed to be quickly redirected to safer topics like the weather or property taxes. This wasn't new. This was a symphony I'd been listening to for 18 years, and I knew every note by heart.
When I was 16 and made varsity soccer despite being the smallest player on the team, Richard spent exactly 30 seconds acknowledging it before launching into a 20-minute monologue about Victoria's straight A's in freshman algebra. When I graduated valedictorian from Millbrook High, the family celebration dinner became a planning session for Victoria's Sweet 16 party. When I received a full ROTC scholarship to Oregon State University, Richard's response was to worry out loud about whether military college programs were legitimate education or just fancy boot camps. The pattern was so consistent you could set a watch by it. Olivia achieves something, Richard finds a way to diminish it. Victoria either ignores it entirely or finds some way to make it about herself. The extended family follows Richard's lead like backup singers in a chorus they'd memorized years ago. Take my high school graduation, for example. I'd worked 3 part-time jobs throughout senior year, cleaning offices at dawn, stocking shelves at the grocery store after school, and tutoring younger kids on weekends. Not because we needed the money, but because Richard had made it clear that anything I wanted beyond basic necessities would have to be earned myself. Character building, he called it. Meanwhile, Victoria's weekly allowance exceeded what I made in a month. At the graduation ceremony, when they announced I'd be attending Oregon State on a full scholarship, you could hear the pride in the principal's voice. Olivia Johnson has demonstrated exceptional academic achievement while maintaining employment and contributing to her community through volunteer work with veterans organizations. The auditorium erupted in applause. Parents I'd never met were turning to congratulate Richard and Victoria. But instead of basking in the moment, Richard spent the entire reception talking to other parents about Victoria's acceptance into the honors program at Millbrook Community College. "We're so proud," he'd say, his arm around Victoria's shoulders. "She's going to study business administration, maybe take over some of my real estate ventures eventually." When someone would ask about me, he'd give a tight smile and say, "Oh, Olivia's doing the military thing. We'll see how that works out." The military thing, like I decided to become a professional juggler or start a traveling circus. But the pattern went deeper than just academic achievements. It was embedded in every family interaction, every holiday gathering, every casual conversation. When I started dating Jake Morrison my junior year, Richard interrogated him like he was applying for top-secret clearance, asking about his family's financial situation and his long-term prospects. When Victoria started dating Trevor Blackstone, whose main qualifications were a trust fund and a cocaine habit his parents paid private rehab facilities to overlook, Richard welcomed him into the family like a conquering hero returning from war. The double standard wasn't subtle. It was architectural, built into the very foundation of how our family functioned. Christmas mornings were particularly illuminating exercises in family hierarchy. Victoria's gifts came wrapped in expensive paper with elaborate bows, each one carefully selected to match her current interests and future aspirations. Professional art supplies when she mentioned she wanted to try painting, a high-end laptop when she started college, designer clothes from stores I couldn't pronounce, much less afford. My gifts were practical. Socks, generic school supplies, gift cards to discount retailers. The year I turned 18, Victoria received a brand new Honda Civic with a giant red bow tied around the side mirror. My gift was a $25 gift card to an Army surplus store and a card that read, "For your military phase." Victoria got a car, I got camping gear and sarcasm. But perhaps the most telling example of the family dynamic happened during my sophomore year of college when I made the dean's list while simultaneously completing my first phase of officer training. It was a grueling semester, 18 credit hours of advanced coursework plus weekend training exercises that left me exhausted and occasionally bleeding from various outdoor leadership challenges. When the dean's list was published, I called home excited to share the news. Richard answered the phone and I could hear the television in the background. "Hey, I made dean's list," I said, practically bouncing with excitement. "That's nice, honey. Victoria, turn that up. I want to hear this commercial about those new condominiums downtown." That's nice, honey. 4 words that summed up my entire childhood. Dismissive enough to hurt, but not cruel enough to justify getting upset about. The perfect weapon for death by 1,000 tiny cuts. Victoria had mastered this technique as well. When I'd share stories from training exercises or academic achievements, she'd respond with comments like, "That sounds really hard," in a tone that managed to make hard sound like pointless. Or she'd immediately pivot to her own experiences. "Speaking of school, wait until you hear about what happened in my marketing class." The extended family had learned to follow suit. Aunt Patricia, Uncle Kenneth, cousins Derek and Amanda, they all knew the script. Nod politely when Olivia talks, then quickly redirect conversation back to safer territory. Victoria's internship at Richard's real estate office, Richard's latest property development, anyone's anything except Olivia's military service. It became so predictable that I started timing it. From the moment I'd start talking about my experiences to the moment someone would change the subject, I could usually count on about 45 seconds. Just long enough to be polite, not long enough to show genuine interest. And tonight, as they sat around this same table debating the authenticity of medals I'd bled for, earned through actions they couldn't even imagine, I realized something profound. This wasn't about military service. This was about control. For 18 years, they'd controlled the narrative of who I was allowed to be in this family. The struggling daughter, the difficult child, the one who chose the hard path instead of the profitable one.
But they were about to learn something that would shatter their comfortable assumptions forever. Some narratives can't be controlled. Some truths are too big to diminish. And some phone calls change everything. The moment everything changed happened on a Tuesday in March, 3 weeks after my 19th birthday. Mom had been gone for 5 years by then, but her absence still echoed through our house like a door that wouldn't stop slamming. I was home from Oregon State for spring break, sitting at the kitchen counter working on a research paper about military logistics in modern warfare. The irony wasn't lost on me. Even my college coursework seemed to irritate Richard simply by existing. Victoria burst with the front door like a tornado of excitement, her cheeks flushed from the cold Oregon rain. "Dad!" she called out, not even acknowledging my presence as she rushed past me toward Richard's home office. "Dad, you're never going to believe what happened!" I could hear the conversation from the kitchen, even though they were trying to keep their voices down. Victoria had just been offered an internship at Preston and Associates, the most prestigious marketing firm in Portland. Not just any internship, a paid position that typically went to graduate students with years of experience, the kind of opportunity that could launch an entire career. "This is incredible, Victoria," Richard's voice carried down the hallway, warm with genuine pride. "I knew Marcus Preston back in business school. when we give him a call, see if we can set up a dinner to discuss your future with the company." 30 minutes later, they were both in the living room, Victoria on the phone with her best friend Jessica, practically squealing with excitement, while Richard made notes on a legal pad, already planning her career trajectory. The energy in the house was electric, celebratory, alive in a way it hadn't been since Mom died. I waited. Part of me thought they might include me in the celebration, ask about my own spring break plans, or at least acknowledge that something good had happened to someone in our family. Instead, they ordered pizza and opened a bottle of champagne. The expensive kind Richard kept locked in his wine cabinet for special occasions. That's when I made the decision that would define the next decade of my life. "I have some news too," I said, closing my laptop and walking into the living room. Richard was pouring champagne into crystal flutes, the ones that had been Mom's. Victoria was scrolling through her phone, probably updating her social media with the internship announcement. Richard looked up, his expression neutral. "Oh, what's that?" I took a deep breath. "I enlisted. I signed my papers this morning at the recruitment station in Corvallis. I ship out for basic training in 6 weeks." The silence that followed was deafening. Richard's hands stopped moving, the champagne bottle suspended in midair. Victoria looked up from her phone, her mouth slightly open. Even the grandfather clock in the corner seemed to stop ticking. "You what?" Richard's voice was barely above a whisper. "I enlisted in the army. I'm going to be a soldier." Richard set the champagne bottle down with deliberate care, like he was defusing a bomb. "Olivia, please tell me this is some kind of joke." "It's not a joke. I've been thinking about it for months. I want to serve my country. I want to do something that matters." Victoria finally found her voice. "Liv, that's insane. You could get killed over there. For what? Some politician's war that has nothing to do with us?" But it was Richard's reaction that cut the deepest. He stood up slowly, walked to the window, and stared out at the rain for what felt like an hour, but was probably only 30 seconds. When he turned back to face me, his expression was a mixture of disappointment and something else, something that looked almost like disgust. "Olivia, I don't understand you," he said quietly. "Victoria just got the opportunity of a lifetime, a real career, a real future. And you decide to throw your life away on some romantic notion about playing soldier." "I'm not playing anything. This is serious." "Serious?" He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You want to know what's serious? Serious is building something, creating value, making a contribution to society that doesn't involve pointing weapons at people. Victoria understands that. She's going to make something of herself." The comparison hung in the air like poison gas. Victoria was making something of herself. I was throwing my life away. "Richard, this is important to me," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I've thought about this carefully. I've researched the opportunities, the education benefits, the leadership training." "Leadership training?" He cut me off with a dismissive wave. "Olivia, you can get leadership training in a real job, in business, in a career that doesn't require you to carry a rifle and follow orders from people who peaked in high school." Victoria was nodding along, her moment of celebration now completely overshadowed by what she clearly saw as my catastrophic decision. "Liv, come on, you're smart. You're in college. Why would you want to go crawl around in the mud and take orders from drill sergeants?" That's when I realized they would never understand. They saw military service as failure, as a last resort for people who couldn't make it in the civilian world. To them, I wasn't choosing an honorable path of service. I was giving up on having a real life. "Because," I said, my voice stronger now, "some things are more important than profit margins and marketing campaigns. Some things are worth fighting for." Richard's jaw tightened. "And what exactly are you fighting for, Olivia? Freedom? Democracy? Those are just words politicians use to justify sending other people's children to die for oil companies and defense contractors." The cynicism in his voice was breathtaking. This from a man who flew American flags in front of every property he developed, who attended Veterans Day ceremonies for the photo opportunities, who claimed to support the troops when it was convenient for his political and business interests. "I'm fighting for the idea that service matters more than success," I said. "That protecting people is more important than impressing them." Victoria stood up abruptly. "This is ridiculous, Liv. You're being dramatic and self-righteous. Just because you're not good at normal things doesn't mean you have to run away and join the army." Not good at normal things. The words hit me like a physical blow. In Victoria's mind, my decision to serve wasn't courageous. It was compensatory. I wasn't choosing duty over comfort. I was fleeing failure for fantasy. Richard walked over to his bar cart and poured himself a scotch. Neat, no ice, the same way he'd been drinking it since Mom died. "When you wash out of basic training," he said without looking at me, "when you realize that real life isn't like the movies, don't expect me to fix this for you. I won't make phone calls. I won't pull strings. You want to learn this lesson the hard way? You're on your own." The conditional wasn't lost on me. Not if I washed out, when. He'd already decided I would fail before I'd even begun. That night, I lay in my childhood bedroom, the same room I'd been sleeping in for 19 years, and listened to them celebrating Victoria's internship downstairs. Laughter, music, the sound of more champagne being opened. They'd moved on from my announcement like it was an unpleasant commercial break in their regularly scheduled programming. I realized then that I wasn't just enlisting in the Army, I was enlisting in the Army despite my family. I was choosing to become someone they couldn't understand, doing something they couldn't diminish, in a world where achievement was measured by actions rather than approval. 6 weeks later, when the bus pulled away from the Greyhound station in downtown Portland, Richard and Victoria weren't there to see me off. They were both at work. Real work, as Richard had taken to calling it. But I wasn't looking back anymore. I was looking towards a future where my worth wouldn't be determined by their validation, where my service would speak louder than their silence. Fort Benning, Georgia in July feels like training inside a pizza oven, but I thrived in ways that surprised even me. While other recruits wilted under the combination of 100-degree heat and Drill Sergeant Morrison's creative vocabulary, I found myself getting stronger, faster, more focused with each passing week. The structure that Richard had dismissed as following orders from people who peaked in high school became the framework that transformed me from Richard's disappointment into someone I actually recognized in the mirror. Week 3 of basic training, during a particularly brutal obstacle course run, I helped carry Private Elena Vasquez across the finish line after she twisted her ankle on the rope climb. Instead of leaving her behind, which would have been the easy choice, I threw her arm over my shoulder and we crossed together, both of us making the time standard by exactly 12 seconds. Drill Sergeant Morrison pulled me aside afterward. "Johnson, you could have run that course in half the time without dead weight slowing you down. Why didn't you?" "Because we succeed together or we don't succeed at all, Drill Sergeant." He nodded once. That was it. But that afternoon, my name appeared on the list for advanced leadership training. Elena later told me it was the first time in weeks she'd felt like someone actually saw her as a person, rather than just another struggling recruit. That became my reputation at Benning, the soldier who didn't leave people behind. During night navigation exercises, I'd find myself naturally gathering up the soldiers who were struggling with their compass readings, forming impromptu study groups in the barracks after lights out. When Private Chen had a panic attack during his first live fire exercise, I talked him through his breathing while helping him clean and reassemble his rifle until his hands stopped shaking. My platoon sergeant, Staff Sergeant Williams, noticed. "Johnson, you've got that rare combination of competence and compassion that makes natural leaders. Most people have one or the other. The truly effective leaders have both." I graduated basic training second in my class of 240 recruits. Not first. That honor went to Private Martinez, who could run a 6-minute mile and do pull-ups until the sun set. But second was something Richard had never predicted for a stepdaughter who was throwing her life away on romantic notions. Advanced individual training at Fort Gordon was where I discovered my gift for logistics and tactical analysis. While other soldiers struggled with supply chain management and resource allocation problems, I found myself visualizing solutions like three-dimensional puzzles. Our instructor, Sergeant First Class Thompson, would present scenarios that typically took groups of 4 soldiers 3 hours to solve. I was consistently finishing them alone in 90 minutes. Johnson, he said, after I'd correctly calculated the fuel, ammunition, and supply requirements for a hypothetical forward operating base supporting 300 soldiers for 6 months, you don't just understand logistics, you think in logistics. That's not something we can teach. That's how your brain is wired. He recommended me for the Logistics Leadership Development Program, an accelerated track that would put me on course for rapid promotion and specialized training. Out of 150 soldiers in my AIT class, only 3 were selected. I was the only woman.
My first duty assignment was Fort Campbell, Kentucky, with the 101st Airborne Division. The Screaming Eagles, a unit with more combat deployments than any other division in the Army. I was 20 years old, carrying myself with the confidence of someone who had finally found where she belonged. But it was during my first deployment to Afghanistan that I truly discovered what I was capable of. Bagram Airfield in 2019 was organized chaos. Helicopters landing and taking off around the clock. Supply convoys rolling in covered with dust and determination. Soldiers from a dozen different nations working together to maintain the most complex logistics operation in modern military history. I was assigned to the 3rd Brigade Combat Team as a junior logistics coordinator, essentially a glorified inventory clerk with a security clearance. 3 weeks into deployment, our primary supply route got hit by a coordinated IED attack that destroyed 2 supply trucks and injured 4 soldiers. The entire operation ground to a halt while command tried to figure out how to get critical supplies to 3 forward operating bases that were running dangerously low on everything from ammunition to medical supplies. That's when I approached Captain Rodriguez with what she later called the most audacious logistical proposal she'd ever heard from a private first class. Instead of waiting for the main supply route to be cleared and secured, a process that could take weeks, I proposed using a combination of helicopter resupply and a secondary route through the Khyber Pass that hadn't been used for supply runs in 18 months. The route was longer, more dangerous, and would require precise coordination with Pakistani border officials, but it could get critical supplies to our forward positions within 72 hours. "Johnson," Captain Rodriguez said, studying my hand-drawn maps and supply calculations, "this is either brilliant or completely insane. Possibly both." "Ma'am, respectfully, our guys at FOB Guardians are down to 3 days of ammunition. FOB Liberty is completely out of medical supplies. Sometimes brilliance and insanity look exactly the same until you see the results." She gave me authorization to coordinate the operation. For the next 3 days, I worked 18-hour shifts, coordinating with Air Force helicopter pilots, Pakistani border officials, convoy commanders, and supply depot managers across 3 countries. I calculated fuel consumption rates, weather patterns, optimal flight paths, and backup contingency plans for 12 different potential failure points. The operation was flawless. Every supply run hit its target on schedule. Every forward operating base received exactly. Word spread quickly through the chain of command. Within a week, I was reassigned to work directly with the Brigade Operations Center, coordinating supply operations for the entire 3rd Brigade. My commanding officer, Colonel Sarah Brighton, called me into her office. "Johnson, I've been in the Army for 22 years. I've seen a lot of soldiers who are good at following orders and some who are good at thinking on their feet. You're something rarer. You're good at seeing solutions that other people miss entirely. That's not a skill we take lightly around here." She recommended me for sergeant ahead of schedule and for Ranger School, one of the most demanding leadership programs in the military. Out of the 2,400 soldiers in our brigade, fewer than 30 were Ranger qualified. I would be the first woman from our unit to attempt the course. Ranger School at Fort Benning was 61 days of controlled suffering, designed to strip away everything except your essential character. Sleep deprivation, caloric restriction,
constant physical and mental challenges that pushed every candidate to their breaking point. The graduation rate was typically around 40%. For women, it was lower. I graduated in the top 15% of my class. By the time I returned to Afghanistan for my second deployment, I wasn't the same 20-year-old who had left Oregon with a duffel bag and a point to prove. I was Staff Sergeant Johnson, Ranger qualified, with a reputation for solving impossible problems under impossible circumstances. When our unit got separated during a sandstorm near the Pakistani border, I was the one who navigated us back to friendly territory, using nothing but a compass and 15 years of Oregon wilderness experience courtesy of Mom's camping trips before she got sick. These weren't just job duties. They were life and death decisions that other soldiers trusted me to make correctly. And I did, over and over, until my reputation preceded me into every assignment, every deployment, every mission briefing. By my 6th year of service, junior officers were requesting me for their units. Senior NCOs were asking my opinion on tactical problems. Colonel Brighton wasn't just recommending me for promotions, she was grooming me for positions typically reserved for soldiers with twice my experience. Johnson, she told me during my re-enlistment ceremony, you have that rare combination of tactical intelligence and moral courage that makes great soldiers into great leaders. The Army needs more people like you. But none of this mattered to Richard and Victoria. When I called home after my promotion to Staff Sergeant, Richard's response was, "That's nice, honey. Victoria just got promoted to Senior Account Manager at her marketing firm." When I sent photos from my Ranger graduation, Victoria posted on social media about her new apartment in downtown Portland, complete with granite countertops and a view of the river. When I called to tell them about my Bronze Star recommendation, Richard was in a meeting. Victoria was at yoga class. Neither of them called back. The pattern was so consistent, it became predictable. My achievements bounced off them like rain on concrete, while their accomplishments were family celebrations requiring champagne and phone calls to extended relatives. But I wasn't the same person who had left Oregon 8 years earlier, desperate for their approval. I was someone who had earned the respect of people whose opinion actually mattered. People who measured courage in actions, rather than bank accounts. And I was about to discover that sometimes recognition comes from exactly the places where it matters most. Operation Nightfall wasn't supposed to exist. It was a contingency plan buried so deep in classified Pentagon files that fewer than 20 people in the entire Department of Defense even knew it had been written. But on October 23, 2023, at 0347 hours Kabul time, contingency became reality, and I became the person responsible for bringing 38 American hostages home alive. It started with a phone call that woke me from the deepest sleep I'd had in weeks. I was at Bagram Airfield, 3 days away from rotating back to Fort Campbell for what was supposed to be a 6-month stateside assignment. My replacement had already been briefed. My gear was packed. My flight manifest was approved. Staff Sergeant Johnson, report to the TOC immediately. Full kit, hot weapon, maximum security protocols. The voice on the other end belonged to Colonel Brighton, and she sounded like someone had just told her the world was ending. The Tactical Operations Center at 0400 hours Kabul time looked like a scene from a disaster movie. Every screen was active, every radio crackling with encrypted traffic, every officer moving with the kind of controlled urgency that meant someone, somewhere, was in mortal danger. Colonel Brighton saw me enter and motioned me toward the briefing room. "Johnson, what I'm about to tell you cannot leave this room. Ever. Are we clear?" "Crystal clear, ma'am." She activated a secure projection system, and satellite imagery filled the wall-mounted screen. A compound in the mountains of Waziristan, surrounded by rocky terrain that looked like the surface of Mars. Red dots marked enemy positions, blue dots showed friendly assets. And in the center, a single yellow square marked the target building. 18 hours ago, 38 American civilian contractors working on a water purification project in Waziristan were taken hostage by a splinter cell of Haqqani network fighters. The hostages are being held in this compound, approximately 40 kilometers from the Pakistani border. My stomach dropped. Civilian contractors meant engineers, technicians, medical personnel.
People whose only crime was trying to bring clean water to villages that hadn't seen infrastructure improvements in decades. People with families back home who had no idea their loved ones were now bargaining chips in a geopolitical chess game. Ma'am, what's our response timeline? Colonel Brighton's expression was grim. The State Department is negotiating, but intelligence indicates the hostage takers are planning to execute 5 Americans every 12 hours until their demands are met. We have approximately 8 hours before the first executions. She clicked to the next slide, showing topographical maps with overlaid flight paths and assault routes. The problem is location and access. The compound sits in a valley with only 2 viable approach routes, both heavily defended. Conventional rescue operations would require a full battalion and result in significant casualties, both military and civilian. I studied the maps, my mind automatically calculating distances, elevation changes, defensive positions, and extraction routes. Ma'am, what about aerial insertion? The compound has anti-aircraft capabilities. Any helicopter attempting insertion would be shot down before reaching the target. That's when I saw it. A detail so small that 3 different intelligence analysts had missed it, but to someone with my logistics background, it stood out like a beacon. Colonel, this stream here, I pointed to a thin blue line snaking through the valley floor, it connects to this larger river system that runs along the Pakistani border. These satellite images show water flow patterns, but they also show something else. I traced the stream with my finger. These aren't just geographical features. They're supply routes. Look at these worn paths along the bank bed, these cleared areas that look like temporary camps. This entire network has been used for moving supplies and personnel for years. Colonel Brighton leaned closer. What are you thinking, Johnson? I'm thinking we don't go over their defenses or through them. We go under them. Literally. For the next 20 minutes, I outlined a plan that was part special operations mission, part underground railroad, and part logistics miracle. Instead of a conventional assault, we would insert a small team upstream, follow the underground river system that ran beneath the compound, emerge inside their defensive perimeter, neutralize the guards, and extract the hostages through the same route. The advantages are significant, I explained, sketching diagrams on the whiteboard. We avoid their anti-aircraft defenses entirely, we bypass their perimeter security, we achieve complete tactical surprise, and most importantly, we minimize risk to the hostages because we control the extraction route from the moment we engage. Colonel Brighton stared at the plans for what felt like an eternity. Johnson, this is either the most innovative tactical solution I've ever seen, or it's completely insane.
Ma'am, respectfully, when conventional solutions get people killed, sometimes insane is the only rational choice. She picked up the secure phone. Get me General Hawthorne, priority alpha clearance. 30 minutes later, I was briefing a room full of people whose names appeared on Pentagon organizational charts. General Patricia Hawthorne, commander of Joint Special Operations, Colonel Marcus Fitzgerald, my regimental commander, Major Angela Santos from Army Intelligence, Captain David Chen from the 75th Ranger Regiment. They asked questions I had already anticipated. Equipment requirements, timeline feasibility, casualty probability assessments, backup contingency plans. For every question, I had answers backed by calculations, precedent studies, and risk analysis. The mission profile calls for a 6-person team, I concluded. 2 combat swimmers for underwater navigation, 2 rangers for assault and security, 1 medic for hostage triage, and 1 logistics coordinator for real-time operational management. General Hawthorne looked up from her notes. Johnson, who did you have in mind for the logistics coordinator position? Ma'am, with respect, there's only one person in theater with the specific combination of underwater operations experience, logistics expertise, and tactical knowledge necessary to coordinate this mission in real time, and she's standing in this room. The silence that followed was the kind that changes lives. I could hear the air conditioning system cycling, the distant sound of helicopters on the flight line, my own heartbeat in my ears. Staff Sergeant Johnson, General Hawthorne said finally, you're not just proposing a mission. You're volunteering to lead it. Yes, ma'am, I am. Colonel Brighton spoke up. "General, Johnson has the strongest tactical record in my brigade. If anyone can pull this off, it's her." The decision took exactly 90 seconds. I went from mission planner to mission commander faster than it takes most people to decide what to have for breakfast. 4 hours later, I was leading 5 of the most elite soldiers in the U.S. military through underground river systems that hadn't seen human traffic since the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. The water was ice cold, the current was stronger than our intelligence had predicted, and our timeline was compressed to the point where we had zero margin for error. But the plan worked. We emerged inside the compound at exactly 23:47 hours, 12 minutes ahead of schedule. We neutralized the guards using suppressed weapons and tactical coordination that would have made our instructors proud. We secured all 38 hostages without firing a single shot that could have alerted additional security forces. The extraction took 3 hours. 38 scared, exhausted civilians guided through underground river systems by soldiers they would never be allowed to identify. Towards safety, they had stopped believing was possible. When we emerged at the extraction point, every single hostage was alive and accounted for. 0 friendly casualties, 0 civilian casualties. Complete mission success. General Hawthorne met us at Bagram Airfield as the helicopters touched down. She pulled me aside as the hostages were being processed by medical teams and intelligence debriefers. "Johnson, that was exceptional work. That was the kind of leadership and tactical innovation that saves lives and changes how we think about impossible problems." She handed me a card with her direct contact information. "When this gets declassified in 20 years, there are going to be case studies written about tonight. Your name is going to be in military leadership textbooks." 2 weeks later, I received official notification that I was being recommended for the Bronze Star with Valor device. The citation would read, "For exceptionally valorous conduct and tactical innovation during Operation Nightfall." Staff Sergeant Johnson's leadership directly resulted in the successful rescue of 38 American civilians and demonstrated the highest standards of courage and competence under extreme circumstances. But the medal ceremony would have to wait, because Operation Nightfall was classified at levels that would keep it secret for decades. The families of the rescued hostages would be told their loved ones had been freed through diplomatic negotiations. The media would report a successful State Department initiative. And I would go back to my regular duties like nothing had happened, carrying the knowledge that I had just executed one of the most successful hostage rescue operations in modern military history. What I didn't know was that my family was about to learn about it too, in exactly the way I'd least expected. I should have known something was wrong when the Bronze Star ceremony kept getting postponed. First, it was scheduling conflicts with senior leadership. Then it was administrative processing delays. Then it was awaiting final classification review. Each delay came with the same apologetic explanation from Colonel Brighton. Classified operations require additional verification protocols. For 6 months, I waited. I threw myself into training new logistics personnel, completed my airborne refresher course, and prepared for what everyone assumed would be my next deployment. The Bronze Star recommendation sat somewhere in the Pentagon bureaucracy, working its way through channels I couldn't track and didn't have clearance to question. Then, on a humid Tuesday morning in April, Sergeant Martinez from Communications walked into my office with a manila envelope marked, "Personal mail, forward from home station." "Johnson, this came through the family notification system. Looks like someone back home sent you a newspaper clipping." I opened the envelope expecting wedding announcements or local news from Oregon. Instead, I found myself staring at the front page of the Portland Tribune with a headline that made my blood freeze.
The photo beneath the headline showed a man in dress blues shaking hands with General Patricia Hawthorne herself, the same General Hawthorne who had personally thanked me at Bagram Airfield, the same general who had told me my name would be in military textbooks. But the man in the photo wasn't me. It was Lieutenant James Morrison, my stepbrother Richard's nephew, the same James Morrison who had washed out of Ranger School after 3 weeks, the same James Morrison who had spent his entire 4-year enlistment pushing papers at Joint Base Lewis McChord outside Seattle, the same James Morrison who had never deployed anywhere more dangerous than a training exercise in North Carolina. My hands shook as I read the article.
Lieutenant James Morrison of Portland, Oregon, was awarded the Bronze Star with Valor device yesterday at a Pentagon ceremony honoring his heroic leadership during a classified hostage rescue operation. Morrison, 29, led a joint special operations mission that successfully rescued 38 American civilian contractors from terrorist captivity in an undisclosed location in Central Asia. Lieutenant Morrison's tactical innovation and exceptional leadership under fire saved American lives and demonstrated the finest traditions of military service, said General Patricia Hawthorne during the ceremony. This operation will serve as a case study in military leadership for years to come. The article continued with quotes from Morrison about the importance of creative problem-solving in high-stakes situations and the honor of serving alongside America's finest warriors. It mentioned his extensive special operations background and his rapid promotion through the ranks due to exceptional performance. Every single detail was a lie. Every single achievement was mine. I read the article 3 times before the full scope of what had happened finally sank in. Morrison hadn't just received a medal he didn't earn, he had received my medal, my mission, my citation, my moment with General Hawthorne, my handshake with the Pentagon senior leadership. Someone had simply changed the name on the paperwork and handed my Bronze Star to Richard's nephew. I stumbled to my computer and pulled up the Army personnel database, searching for Morrison's service record. What I found made my stomach turn. According to his official file, James Morrison had been temporarily assigned to classified special operations duties during the exact time frame of Operation Nightfall. His personnel records showed deployment to undisclosed locations Central Asian theater with a return date that matched my post-mission timeline exactly. Someone had fabricated an entire deployment history for Morrison. They had inserted him into classified mission records that he had never seen, operations he had never participated in, achievements he had never accomplished. And they had erased me from the same records with surgical precision. I called Colonel Brighton's office. Her aide, Lieutenant Williams, answered on the second ring. "Colonel Brighton's office, Lieutenant Williams speaking." "This is Staff Sergeant Johnson. I need to speak with Colonel Brighton immediately. It's about Operation Nightfall." There was a pause. "Staff Sergeant Johnson, I'm sorry, but I don't show any Operation Nightfall in our classified mission database. Could you be referring to a different operation?" My heart stopped. "Lieutenant, please check again. Operation Nightfall, October 2023. Hostage rescue in Kazakhstan. I was the mission commander." Another pause, longer this time. "Ma'am, I've checked all our classified operations for the past 18 months. We have no record of any mission by that designation. And according to your personnel file, you've been assigned to routine logistics support duties throughout your entire deployment." The line went quiet. I could hear my own breathing, the distant sound of helicopters on the flight line, the air conditioning cycling in my office. Everything sounded suddenly far away, like I was hearing the world through water. "Lieutenant Williams, let me speak to Colonel Brighton directly." "I'm sorry, Staff Sergeant, but Colonel Brighton is no longer assigned to this unit. She transferred to Pentagon duty 3 weeks ago. Her replacement, Colonel Anderson, has no record of any specialized operations involving your personnel." I hung up the phone and stared at my computer screen. According to the personnel database, I had never been involved in Operation Nightfall. According to official records, James Morrison had planned and executed the mission. According to the Army's institutional memory, I had spent October 2023 conducting routine supply inventories and equipment maintenance. They hadn't just stolen my recognition, they had erased me from history. I drove to the base library and used their civilian internet connection to research James Morrison's background. What I found was a web of connections that explained everything. Morrison's father, Robert Morrison, was Richard's business partner in 3 major real estate developments. Robert Morrison was also a major campaign contributor to Senator William Hayes, who sat on the Senate Armed Services Committee. Senator Hayes had been instrumental in securing defense contracts for Morrison and Associates, Richard's real estate company. The connections formed a perfect circle of influence and obligation. Richard's business partner's son gets a Bronze Star he didn't earn. Senator Hayes looks good for supporting a local hero. The Pentagon maintains positive relationships with important political donors. And everyone benefits except the person who actually earned the recognition.
I printed out every article, every photo, every mention of Morrison's heroic service that I could find. The coverage was extensive. Local TV interviews, Veterans Day parade appearances, speaking engagements at high school graduation ceremonies. Morrison had built an entire public persona around achievements that belonged to me. In one particularly nauseating interview with Portland's Channel 8 News, Morrison was asked about the details of his classified rescue mission. "I can't discuss operational specifics," he said with practiced humility, "but I can tell you that when American lives are on the line, you don't hesitate. You don't second guess. You act. That's what we're trained to do."
The interviewer nodded respectfully. What would you say to young people considering military service? I'd tell them that service isn't about glory or recognition. It's about doing what's right, even when no one will ever know what you've done. The real heroes are the ones whose names you'll never hear, whose stories will never be told. I had to turn off the video before I threw my laptop across the room. That evening, I called home for the first time in 8 months. Richard answered on the third ring. "Olivia, what a surprise! We were just talking about you at dinner. Did you see the article about James? Such an inspiring story." "I saw it," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Quite a story, indeed. We're so proud of him. It takes real courage to do what he did. That kind of heroism runs in the family, I suppose." The irony was suffocating. "Richard, can I ask you something about James's military service?" "Of course. What would you like to know?" "When did he deploy to Central Asia? I thought he was stationed in Washington State." There was a slight pause. "Well, you know how these classified operations work, Olivia. The families aren't always kept informed about deployments for security reasons. We were as surprised as anyone when we found out about his rescue mission." "I'm sure you were." "You know, Olivia, it's interesting that you're calling tonight. James mentioned that he might have some opportunities to help other family members advance their military careers. If you're interested in getting involved in more meaningful assignments, he might be able to put in a good word for you." The casual cruelty of it took my breath away. The man who had stolen my achievements was now offering to help me get better assignments. The family that had dismissed my service for 8 years was now celebrating identical service when it came with the right last name. "That's very generous of James," I managed to say. "He's a good kid, always has been. You could learn something from his approach to leadership and service." After I hung up, I sat in my barracks room staring at the wall for 3 hours, not thinking, not planning, just processing the magnitude of what had been done to me. They hadn't just given my medal to someone else. They had given my identity to someone else. My mission, my achievements, my defining moment as a soldier, all of it now belonged to a man who had never heard a shot fired in anger. But the worst part wasn't the theft itself. The worst part was the realization that my own family was celebrating it. They were proud of James Morrison for doing exactly what they had dismissed me for attempting. They were honoring him for the kind of service they had called a waste of my life. The Bronze Star with Valor that should have been hanging in my shadow box was now hanging in James Morrison's, and my family couldn't have been happier about it. I spent 2 weeks building my case like I was preparing for a military tribunal. Every document, every witness statement, every piece of evidence that could prove my involvement in Operation Nightfall. I compiled service records, training certificates, deployment orders, and communications logs. I tracked down Sergeant Martinez, who had delivered mail to me at Bagram. I found the medical records from my pre-mission physical. I even located the requisition forms I signed for the specialized diving equipment used in the operation. The evidence was overwhelming, irrefutable, and completely worthless. My first attempt was through official military channels. I requested a meeting with Colonel Anderson, Colonel Brighton's replacement, to discuss discrepancies in my service record and medal recommendations. His aide scheduled me for a 15-minute appointment on a Thursday morning that felt like walking to my own execution. Colonel Anderson was a thin, precise man who looked like he had been issued along with his uniform. His office was sterile, organized, and completely devoid of anything resembling warmth or humanity. He listened to my presentation with the kind of polite attention you give to someone explaining why they believe in UFOs.
Staff Sergeant Johnson, he said when I finished, these are serious allegations. You're claiming that official military records have been falsified, that awards have been improperly distributed, and that classified operations have been misrepresented to senior leadership. Yes, sir. That's exactly what I'm claiming. He opened a folder on his desk and removed a single sheet of paper. According to this investigation report from Army Criminal Investigation Command, similar allegations were made regarding Operation Nightfall approximately 6 months ago. The investigation concluded that the claims were unfounded and stemmed from confusion about classified operation details and security protocols. My blood ran cold. Sir, I never made any previous allegations. I've never spoken to CID about this matter. The report shows that Staff Sergeant Olivia Johnson filed a complaint alleging improper credit for classified operations. The investigation found no evidence to support the claims and recommended psychological evaluation to address potential stress-related confusion about mission participation. He slid the paper across his desk. The signature at the bottom read, Olivia M. Johnson, in handwriting that looked remarkably similar to my own, but contained subtle differences that only someone who knew my actual signature would notice. Sir, I didn't sign this document. I've never seen this document before today.
Colonel Anderson's expression didn't change. Staff Sergeant, psychological stress from deployment can manifest in various ways. Sometimes soldiers develop false memories about their level of participation in significant operations. It's not uncommon, and it's nothing to be ashamed of. Colonel, with respect, I'm not experiencing false memories. I'm reporting identity theft and fraud. He stood up, indicating the meeting was over. Johnson, I'm going to recommend you speak with Chaplain Williams about resources for dealing with deployment stress. Sometimes talking through these feelings with someone trained in counseling can help clarify confusing memories. I walked out of his office, knowing that any further attempts through military channels would result in psychological evaluation, potential medical discharge, and the complete destruction of my military career. They had prepared for my objections before I had even raised them. My second attempt was through Senator Margaret Kelly's office. As my home state representative, she theoretically had oversight responsibility for constituent military affairs. I wrote a detailed letter explaining the situation, including copies of all my evidence, and sent it through official congressional correspondence channels. 3 weeks later, I received a form letter signed by an aide. Thank you for contacting Senator Kelly's office regarding your military service concerns. The Senator appreciates your dedication to our nation and your desire to ensure proper recognition for all service members. We have forwarded your concerns to the appropriate military oversight committees for their review. Please be assured that Senator Kelly supports our troops and will continue working to ensure proper recognition for military achievements. The letter was so generic, it could have been sent to anyone who had ever worn a uniform. No acknowledgement of the specific allegations, no indication that anyone had actually read my evidence, no suggestion that any investigation would be conducted. 2 days after receiving Senator Kelly's brush-off, I called her office directly and asked to speak with someone about military affairs. After being transferred 4 times, I reached Deputy Chief of Staff Michael Harrison. Mr. Harrison, I'm Staff Sergeant Olivia Johnson. I wrote to Senator Kelly about fraudulent military awards and identity theft involving classified operations. Yes, I have your file right here. Staff Sergeant, I want you to know that we take these allegations very seriously. For a moment, I felt hope. Thank you, sir. What steps are being taken to investigate? Well, we've been in communication with the Pentagon about your concerns. Unfortunately, the Defense Department has informed us that the individual making these allegations has a history of psychological instability and false claims about military service. The room started spinning. Mr. Harrison, that's not true. I have no history of psychological issues or false claims. According to the information we received from Army Personnel Command, you've previously filed complaints alleging participation in missions you weren't involved in. The Pentagon recommends that we treat your allegations as symptomatic of deployment-related stress rather than factual claims requiring investigation. They had poisoned every well.
Every official channel I could access had already been contaminated with false information about my mental state, my service record, and my credibility. Before I had even begun fighting, they had already won. My final attempt was the most desperate and the most painful. I called Richard directly. "Olivia, twice in 1 month? This is becoming a habit. Richard, I need to talk to you about James Morrison and his Bronze Star." "What about it? It's a wonderful achievement for the family." "Richard, James didn't earn that medal. I did. I was the mission commander for Operation Nightfall. James has never been deployed to a combat zone in his life." The silence on the other end lasted longer than I thought the call had dropped. "Olivia?" Richard finally said, his voice colder than I'd ever heard it. "What exactly are you suggesting?" "I'm not suggesting anything. I'm telling you. James Morrison is receiving recognition for a mission he never participated in. That Bronze Star belongs to me." "Olivia, do you realize how serious these accusations are? You're claiming that the United States Army, the Pentagon, and multiple senior officers have all conspired to give your medal to someone else? Do you understand how that sounds?" "It sounds like the truth. It sounds like someone who's having difficulty distinguishing between what she wishes had happened and what actually happened. Olivia, I'm concerned about you. This kind of thinking isn't healthy." The dismissal was surgical, complete, and delivered with the kind of concerned authority that makes victims question their own sanity. "Richard, I have evidence, documents, witness statements, service records." "Olivia, honey, anyone can compile documents that seem to support what they want to believe. The question is whether objective observers find those documents credible, and clearly the people who matter don't find your claims believable." "The people who matter?" "The military leadership who investigated your allegations, the Pentagon officials who reviewed your evidence, the congressional staff who evaluated your concerns. These are serious people with serious responsibilities. If they don't find your claims believable, what does that tell you?" It told me that the game was rigged, the deck was stacked, and I was playing by rules that had been designed to ensure I lost before I started. "Richard, please, just consider the possibility that I'm telling the truth." "Richard, I've considered it, and I've concluded that you need help, professional help. James has offered to use his connections to get you into a good program for veterans dealing with service-related stress. You should take him up on that offer." The person who had stolen my achievements was now offering to help me get therapy for being upset about it. Let me ask you something, Richard. If I had come home with a Bronze Star, if I had been featured in the Portland Tribune, if I had been the one giving speeches about heroism and service, would you have been proud of me? The pause before his answer told me everything I needed to know.
Olivia, that's a hypothetical question. What matters is reality. And the reality is that James earned recognition for exceptional service while you're struggling to accept your own more limited role in military operations. He had just told me that my family would have been proud of me for doing exactly what they were currently refusing to believe I had done. "I think this conversation is over," I said. "I think you're right. But Olivia, please consider getting help. For your own sake, and for the sake of everyone who cares about you." After I hung up, I sat in my barracks room and realized that I wasn't just fighting against the theft of my recognition. I was fighting against a system designed to protect itself at all costs, even when protecting itself meant destroying the people who had served it most faithfully. They had prepared for my objections. They had manufactured evidence of my instability. They had created a narrative in which my search for justice became proof of my psychological problems. And they had done it all while convincing my own family that they were protecting me from my own delusions. After my failed confrontation with Richard, something inside me broke. Not dramatically, not all at once, but slowly, like a dam developing hairline cracks that eventually become unstoppable floods. I stopped fighting. I stopped calling home. I stopped trying to prove what I knew to be true to people who had already decided I was delusional.
Instead, I did what I had always done when life became unbearable. I buried myself in work. For the next 18 months, I became the most productive, most reliable, most aggressively competent soldier in my entire battalion. I volunteered for every additional duty, every extra training exercise, every deployment opportunity that came available. When other soldiers went home for leave, I stayed on base and organized equipment inventories. When they took weekend passes, I developed new training protocols. When they complained about the heat, the cold, the food, or the schedule, I just worked harder. My fitness scores were perfect. My performance evaluations were flawless. My military bearing was impeccable. From the outside, I looked like the model soldier, the kind of NCO that junior officers requested for their units and senior leadership pointed to as an example of military excellence. But inside, I was disappearing. The nightmares that had started after my first deployment got worse. Not the standard combat dreams that most soldiers experience: explosions, gunfire, the faces of people you couldn't save. My nightmares were different. They were about invisibility. Dreams where I would be screaming at the top of my lungs while people looked right through me. Dreams where I would show up to formation only to discover that my name wasn't on any roster, my bunk wasn't in any barracks, my existence wasn't in any database. I would wake up at 0300 hours in a cold sweat, checking my military ID card to make sure my name was still printed on it, touching my rank insignia to verify they were still attached to my uniform. The rational part of my mind knew these fears were irrational. The rest of me wasn't so sure. Sleep became elusive, then impossible. I would lie in my bunk staring at the ceiling, calculating and recalculating supply inventories, logistic timelines, equipment specifications. Anything to keep my mind occupied with concrete, verifiable details. Numbers didn't lie. Equipment lists didn't change based on who was more politically connected. Ammunition counts didn't depend on whose family had better relationships with Pentagon officials. During the day, I threw myself into training with an intensity that worried my fellow soldiers. I would run until my legs gave out, then walk until I could run again. I would lift weights until my arms shook, then do bodyweight exercises until I collapsed. Physical exhaustion was the only thing that quieted the voice in my head asking whether any of my achievements had actually happened. Sergeant First Class Williams, my immediate supervisor, noticed the change. "Johnson, you're working like someone's chasing you with a flamethrower. Everything okay?" "Just maintaining standards, Sergeant." "There's maintaining standards, and then there's whatever this is. When's the last time you took leave?" I couldn't remember. Not because I had a bad memory, but because the concept of voluntary time away from structured military life had become foreign to me. What would I do on leave? Go home to a family that thought I was mentally unstable? Visit friends who had moved on with their civilian lives while I was deployed? Sit in an empty apartment somewhere, alone with thoughts I was working 18-hour days to avoid? "I'm fine, Sergeant, just focused on mission readiness." He studied my face with the kind of experienced scrutiny that senior NCOs develop after years of managing soldiers through personal crises. "Johnson, you know there are resources available if you need to talk to someone about deployment stress, family issues, career concerns." "I appreciate that, Sergeant, but I'm handling everything appropriately." He nodded, but I could see the concern in his expression. Within a week, I was scheduled for a routine counseling session with Chaplain Martinez. Not officially ordered, just strongly encouraged to attend. Chaplain Martinez was a soft-spoken woman in her 40s who had deployed to Afghanistan twice as an Army chaplain, before transferring to stateside duties. Her office was decorated with photos from various deployment locations, certificates of appreciation from soldiers she had counseled, and a bookshelf filled with military leadership manuals mixed with religious texts and psychology books.
Staff Sergeant Johnson, Sergeant Williams tells me you've been putting in exceptional hours lately. How are you feeling about your current assignment?
I'm satisfied with my performance and committed to maintaining high standards, Chaplain. She smiled. That sounds like something you'd say during a performance evaluation. How are you feeling as a person, not as a soldier? The question caught me off guard. I had been existing as a soldier for so long that the distinction had become meaningless. I'm not sure I understand the question, Chaplain. When you're not in uniform, when you're not thinking about supply inventories or training schedules, when you're just Olivia Johnson, the human being, how do you feel? I sat in her office for what felt like an hour, trying to remember the last time I had been just Olivia Johnson, the human being. The answer was disturbing. I couldn't. Even during off-duty hours, I was planning logistics operations, reviewing training manuals, or organizing equipment. Even in civilian clothes, I carried myself with military bearing. Even in private moments, I was performing the role of the perfect soldier. Chaplain, I think I've forgotten how to be anything except a soldier. And how does that make you feel? Safe, I said, surprising myself with the honesty. Being a soldier is something I'm good at. Being a soldier is something I can control. Being just Olivia, that's more complicated. Well, what makes it complicated? That's when the dam finally broke. For the next 2 hours, I told Chaplain Martinez everything. Operation Nightfall, James Morrison, the stolen Bronze Star, the family rejection, the systematic erasure of my achievements. I told her about the nightmares, the insomnia, the compulsive work habits, the growing sense that I was disappearing from my own life. She listened without judgment, taking occasional notes, asking clarifying questions that helped me organize thoughts I'd been carrying in chaotic fragments for months. Chaplain, what you're describing sounds like a form of institutional gaslighting. You experienced something significant, you have evidence of what happened, but everyone with authority is telling you that your experience didn't occur. That kind of systematic invalidation can make anyone question their own reality. The relief I felt at having someone simply acknowledge that my experience might be real was overwhelming. Chaplain, am I losing my mind? No, you're not losing your mind, but you are losing yourself. You're so focused on being the perfect soldier that you've forgotten you're also a person who deserves recognition, respect, and basic acknowledgement of her achievements. But if I'm not the perfect soldier, what am I? She leaned forward in her chair. You're someone who did something extraordinary under impossible circumstances. You're someone who saved 38 lives while risking your own. You're someone who demonstrated exactly the kind of courage and innovation that the military claims to value most highly. The fact that your recognition was stolen doesn't change what you accomplished. But no one will ever know. You know. I know now. The peoples whose lives you saved know, even if they don't know your name. Knowledge doesn't require official recognition to be real. For the first time in 18 months, I cried. Not the angry tears of frustration I'd shed alone in my barracks room, but the exhausted tears of someone who had been carrying an impossible weight for too long. Chaplain, I don't know how to stop being angry about this. Maybe you don't need to stop being angry. Maybe you need to find a better way to channel that anger. Anger can be destructive, but it can also be motivating. The question is, what do you want your anger to motivate you to do? I spent the next several weeks thinking about her question. What did I want my anger to motivate me to do? I couldn't change what had happened. I couldn't force the military to acknowledge the truth. I couldn't make my family believe me. I couldn't undo the systematic theft of my achievements. But maybe I could stop letting their validation, or lack thereof, define my worth. Maybe I could start living for my own approval instead of theirs. Maybe I could find a way to reclaim my story even if I had to do it without their permission. The opportunity to do exactly that was coming sooner than I imagined, because sometimes the universe has a sense of justice that institutions lack. Sometimes the truth finds a way to surface, despite everyone's best efforts to bury it. And sometimes vindication comes exactly when you've given up expecting it.
3 months after my sessions with Chaplain Martinez, I was sitting at that same Thanksgiving table in Millbrook, Oregon, watching my family debate whether my Bronze Star was real or fake. The irony was not lost on me that I had spent 2 years trying to prove the truth to people who were now casually dismissing it over turkey and stuffing. But something had changed in those 3 months. The desperate need for their validation had been replaced by something steadier, quieter, but infinitely stronger. The knowledge that my worth didn't depend on their belief. "Come on, Liv," Derek was saying as he reached for more cranberry sauce. "We've all seen those replica medals online. They look exactly like the real thing. You could fool anybody." Victoria nodded knowingly. "Plus, wouldn't we have heard about it if you'd done something actually heroic? I mean, the military loves their publicity. If you'd really rescued people, there would have been news coverage, ceremonies, interviews."
Like James Morrison got, Aunt Patricia chimed in helpfully. Now that was real recognition. Pentagon ceremony, newspaper coverage, speaking engagements. That's how you know someone actually did something significant. Richard raised his wine glass slightly, as if proposing a toast. James understood something important. Service isn't about individual glory. It's about being part of something bigger than yourself. Maybe if you'd focused more on teamwork and less on personal recognition, you would have had more success in your military career. The words should have stung. 2 years ago, they would have sent me spiraling into self-doubt and rage. But sitting there, listening to them casually dismantle achievements they couldn't comprehend, I felt something unexpected. Pity. They were so committed to their narrative about who I was, the difficult daughter, the attention seeker, the one who chose struggle over success, that they couldn't recognize extraordinary achievement when it was sitting right in front of them. "You know what's interesting," I said, cutting into my turkey with deliberate calm, "is that you're right about military publicity. The Pentagon does love recognition ceremonies. They do extensive media outreach. They do make sure that heroic actions get proper coverage." Victoria smirked. "Exactly my point. So when they call during dinner to personally thank someone for classified operations, it usually means something pretty significant happened." Richard frowned. "What are you talking about, Olivia?" That's when my secure phone vibrated in my pocket. The timing was so perfect it felt scripted by a Hollywood screenwriter who specialized in poetic justice. I pulled out the phone, the one with encryption protocols that required Pentagon-level security clearance to operate, and looked at the caller ID. SEDEF Office Priority Alpha. The table went quiet. You could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway, the distant sound of neighborhood kids playing in the street, Victoria's fork scraping against her plate. "Excuse me," I said, standing up from the table. "I need to take this call. It's from the Secretary of Defense." I walked into Richard's home office and closed the door, but I made sure to speak loudly enough that every word would carry into the dining room. "Staff Sergeant Johnson, secure line." "This is Deputy Secretary of Defense Catherine Reynolds calling on behalf of Secretary Williams. Do you have a few minutes to speak?" "Yes, ma'am, of course." "I'm calling personally because we've recently completed a comprehensive review of classified operations conducted between 2020 and 2024. During this review, we discovered significant irregularities in the recognition and documentation of Operation Nightfall." My heart started racing, but I kept my voice steady. "Yes, ma'am. Our investigation revealed that the Bronze Star with Valor device awarded for Operation Nightfall was given to the wrong recipient due to administrative errors and possible fraudulent documentation. The individual who actually planned, commanded, and executed the mission never received proper recognition." Through the closed office door, I could hear the complete silence from the dining room. No conversation, no clinking silverware, no sounds of eating, just the kind of absolute quiet that means everyone is straining to hear every word. "Ma'am, that's very concerning." "Staff Sergeant Johnson, according to classified mission records, witness statements from participating personnel, and after-action reports from commanding officers, you were the mission commander for Operation Nightfall. You developed the tactical approach that saved 38 American civilians. You led the operation that resulted in 0 casualties and complete mission success." I could hear Richard's chair creaking in the dining room. Someone, probably Victoria, whispered something I couldn't make out. "Yes, ma'am. That's correct."
I want you to know that the individual who improperly received recognition for your achievements is currently under investigation for fraudulent claims regarding military service. His Bronze Star has been revoked, and he faces potential criminal charges for stolen valor. The silence from the dining room was now so complete, I wondered if they had all stopped breathing. Ma'am, what happens next? Secretary Williams wants to personally present you with the Bronze Star with Valor device that should have been yours from the beginning. We're scheduling a Pentagon ceremony for December 15th with full media coverage and recognition for the extraordinary leadership you demonstrated during Operation Nightfall. That's very generous, ma'am. Staff Sergeant Johnson, excuse me, Sergeant First Class Johnson, thank you for your exceptional service to our nation. The courage and innovation you demonstrated during Operation Nightfall exemplify the finest traditions of military leadership. Thank you, ma'am. It was an honor to serve.
I hung up the phone and sat in Richard's office for exactly 30 seconds, listening to my heart pound and savoring the knowledge that everything was about to change. When I walked back into the dining room, 5 faces stared at me with expressions ranging from shock to disbelief to what looked like dawning horror. The Bronze Star display case that had started this entire conversation seemed to glow in my peripheral vision. "So," I said, settling back into my chair and picking up my fork, "where were we? Oh yes, you were explaining how replica medals work." Richard's face had gone pale. "Olivia, who was that on the phone?" "The Deputy Secretary of Defense, calling to schedule my Pentagon ceremony." Victoria's mouth opened and closed like she was trying to form words that wouldn't come. "You see," I continued, cutting another piece of turkey, "it turns out that the Pentagon takes stolen valor very seriously. When they discovered that James Morrison had been fraudulently claiming credit for Operation Nightfall, they launched a full investigation. Derek had stopped eating entirely. What investigation? The one that confirmed I was the actual mission commander who saved 38 American civilians? The one that resulted in James Morrison's Bronze Star being revoked and criminal charges being filed against him? The silence that followed was beautiful. It was the sound of a narrative collapsing, of assumptions crumbling, of people who had built their understanding of reality on foundations that had just turned to quicksand. "But that's impossible," Victoria whispered. "James had photos, interviews, official ceremonies." "James had stolen achievements and fraudulent documentation. What I have is official Pentagon recognition, classified mission records, and the personal thanks of the Secretary of Defense." Richard found his voice. "Olivia, I don't understand. If you actually did these things, why didn't you tell us?" I looked at him across the table. This man who had spent 8 years dismissing my service, questioning my achievements, and suggesting I needed psychological help for claiming credit for missions I'd actually led. "I tried to tell you, Richard. For 2 years I tried to tell you, but you were more comfortable believing that I was delusional than believing that I was exceptional." Aunt Patricia cleared her throat nervously. "Well, this is wonderful news, Olivia. We're so proud of you." "Are you? Because 47 minutes ago you were convinced I'd bought this medal online." The question hung in the air like smoke from an extinguished candle. "The Pentagon ceremony is December 15th. Full media coverage, senior military leadership, family members of the people I rescued from that compound in Kazakhstan. You're all invited, of course." I walked toward the front door, then turned back to face them one last time. "For 8 years, you told me that military service wasn't a real career. You told me I was throwing my life away on romantic notions. You told me that recognition only matters when it serves the bigger picture. Well, congratulations. You're about to find out what recognition looks like when it serves the truth instead of your convenience." I opened the front door and stepped into the crisp Oregon evening. Behind me, I could hear them starting to argue, Richard demanding to know how this was possible, Victoria insisting there must be some mistake, Derek asking if this meant James Morrison was really going to prison. But I wasn't listening anymore.
I was finally free. Free from needing their validation, free from carrying their doubts, free from the weight of proving my worth to people who had never bothered to see it. As I drove away from the house where I'd spent 19 years being someone's disappointment, my phone rang again. This time it was Colonel Brighton. "Johnson, I heard about the Pentagon call. How does it feel to have your story back?" I thought about the question for a moment. It feels like justice, ma'am, but more importantly, it feels like closure. Any regrets about how long it took? No, ma'am, I needed the time to learn that my worth didn't depend on their recognition. Getting vindicated feels good, but being whole feels better. 3 weeks later, I stood on the Pentagon stage wearing my dress blues and the Bronze Star that had always belonged to me, while Deputy Secretary Reynolds read the official citation to an audience that included senior military leadership, State Department officials, and 12 family members of the civilians I rescued from that compound in Kazakhstan. Richard, Victoria, Derek, and Aunt Patricia sat in the 4th row, looking like they'd been transported to an alternate universe where everything they thought they knew had been revealed as fiction. But I wasn't performing for them anymore. I was standing there as Staff Sergeant Olivia Johnson, hero, leader, and someone who had finally learned that the most important recognition comes from the person staring back at you in the mirror. The applause when Secretary Williams pinned the Bronze Star to my uniform wasn't for their benefit. It was for every person who had ever been told that their achievements didn't matter, their service didn't count, their truth wasn't real. It was for everyone who had ever been erased and found their way back to themselves. It was for the headline, not the background.